Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thanks for joining us. I'm happy to be having a quick discussion today about a very hot news topic, the potential closure of pubs in part of England, with Tim Martin, who's the chairman of Wetherspoon. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Christopher.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, you're very heavily involved in the industry. Firstly, since July, when the pubs were reopened again, 4th of July, you've had to deal in the pub industry with some unprecedentedly unusual and stringent regulations in terms of social distancing and so on. What has been the experience in Wetherspoon's been in the industry more generally with footfall? How many people are coming in, over summer compared to last year? What's business like basically, and how have the regulations affected that?
Trade was very slow when pubs first reopened in July. It gradually picked up over the following few weeks. It was busy in August with Eat Out to Help Out, plus August is a busier month and people were getting more used to it. It slowed down a lot unsurprisingly with a curfew, probably to crisis levels for many smaller pubs and smaller companies. So I think the industry's been taken on a roller coaster ride, and many people who've worked very hard for many years building their own businesses or building a career within the trade are in jeopardy.
And on the curfew, a lot of people seem to think, well, it's only an hour out of the day, it can't make that much difference. What effect roughly does it have on the takings of an average pub when you have to kick everybody out at 10 o'clock?
I think a lot of the reports from pubs it's about a 25 to 30% difference, which has tipped a lot of pubs into making a loss. It wasn't just the curfew, it was also the fact that they took away the essential nature of a pub. Because in a shop now, as in a pub before the curfew was instituted, you can go to a till. There's normally a perspex screen and you can order at the till. And then that's what pub goers expect. But they changed the rules in an important way in that you have to be seated. So they changed the entire population of pubs into restaurants de facto. And a lot of people doing what you're doing now for a job are sitting down a lot, and when they go to a pub, they like to stand up. And of course, the virus can't tell if you're sitting down or standing up. So it's that, and the fact you have to put on a mask to go to the loo, I think psychologically has had a big effect on customers. The combination of those things.
Yeah, there comes a point where it's just more enjoyable to stay at home and have a drink, I guess. And now the government, clearly in Scotland, of course, the government, as of today, they've closed down the pubs in areas where I think about 2/3 of the population live, and in the rest of the country, there's very, very stringent restrictions. Clearly, that's going to have a very negative effect on pubs. And part of that, I guess, will depend on what kind of bailout the government is providing. But now we're hearing that Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty is pushing very hard for the same thing to happen, certainly in the north of England, if not across the whole country. Even if the government does kind of revive the furlough scheme and comes up with some grants again, what's the outlook for the pub industry in England and indeed in Scotland, if that happens?
Well, I would say it's bleak because you can't keep turning the machine on and off. It's very, very difficult for pubs. We went from £100 million profits. We've got quite a big company in 2019 to losses of 40 or 50 million in the year ended July. So that's with a 3-month closure. So it's very, very expensive, even with a furlough scheme. It does help pubs to survive, but it's bad for pubs, but it's also bad for the economy. And that's a worry for us all, because Wetherspoon pubs alone, amazingly enough, provide £15 million a week of taxes. That's £750 million a year, which is it's 1,000th, I may have got that wrong, 0.1% of all UK taxes. And if you spread that across the industry, it's a financial disaster for the country because you lose the tax income and you also end up having to pay pubs instead. So it's not sustainable in the long run. That's the argument. You may well be able to persuade the government as a pub company that because they pay so much to the government, you've got to keep them in business. But at some point, there's a financial crisis.
Yeah. And what do you make of the, well, let's call it the evidence? I mean, it's difficult to find evidence on some of this stuff. And up to a point, that's quite understandable because we're in uncharted territory and you're not going to have peer-reviewed studies from natural experiments where this has happened before as such. But it seems to me that Chris Whitty's evidence on this is pretty shaky, and that the basic kind of correlation causation problem with just saying, well, a certain number of people who tested positive and have been contacted by NHS Test and Trace have been in a pub in the last week, therefore we need to close the pubs down. That doesn't make a lot of sense. On the other hand, I think intuition and anecdotal evidence that a lot of people have had is that closing the pubs at 10 o'clock, you're either deterring people from going to the pub altogether, in which case they maybe have house parties, or they go to the pub until 10 o'clock, have a good few drinks, and are not really ready to go to bed and have house parties. And one thing we do know is that most of the transmission is taking place in private households. That seems to be one thing everybody can agree on. What's your sense of that? I mean, it seems to me you'll probably agree with this, I guess, but the very obvious unintended consequences here, that you have very highly regulated pub environments, which might not be 100% safe, but what is. And although there isn't strong empirical evidence that there's masses of people going out and transmitting the virus in house parties, it does seem kind of obvious that would happen.
It's as you say, it's hard to get firm evidence, but we've got nearly 900 pubs open in the UK since July, and we've had all sorts of test and trace systems. So 40 million customers, everyone has to sign a form. So there's masses of information available to the public health system. There isn't one example from anywhere. And remember, our pubs, big pubs, centre of town, the press use them, everyone knows about them, doctors use them, test and trace have got the information. Not one example of transmission within a pub, not one. So you would think, wouldn't you, that 10 people met up before the rule of 6 in the Dog and Duck in Windsor, and one of them had the virus, and all 10 of them got it, or maybe even just one or two of the group. There isn't one example of that, not one. The only we've had a number of pubs, about 10% of pubs, where there's been virus amongst the staff. In most of those, it hasn't transferred to other staff. It's mostly just one person. The most we've had is at a pub in Liverpool with quite a few people who got the virus among the staff. I think it's 19, and they all went to a party. And not one example, and of course, the Liverpool Public Health England, etc., are all very aware of the situation. Not one example of transfer to a customer. So I saw a German investigator say during the lockdown that there was a lot of things we don't understand about the virus. And he said he couldn't understand why there wasn't a single example in Germany of the virus being transferred within a hair salon. He thought it would be biologically plausible that there would be a high level of transfers in that warm atmosphere, close body contact, but none. And I think it's the same for pubs. It's biologically plausible because everyone goes there, has a few drinks, they get on well, meet the missus, or the new missus, and but it doesn't seem to be happening in that way. So it's very odd. There's a lot of things like that in medicine. I'll just give one example. Throughout my entire adult life, and I'm 65, everyone said the more exercise you take, the better. And walking is good for you, but running's even better. And that seemed very biologically plausible. What it turns out is if you go for a 5-mile run every day, you hugely increase the chance of having a heart condition called atrial fibrillation. It particularly applies to people who've taken high levels of athletic exercise. But doctors and advisors and academics would never have believed that 10 or 20 years ago. And I think it's like that with the virus. It's, as Shakespeare put it, nothing is but what is not. It's the law of paradox.
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be a lot we don't know about it. We do know quite a bit about the economic impact of these things. We just had the GDP numbers out today. We're still more than 9% below where we were before the pandemic began. I mean, it doesn't look like there's going to be a V-shaped recovery to me, and there certainly won't be one if we go into a circuit breaker or another lockdown or something. I mean, what would you say to politicians who are looking for more to do here but don't want to close down the pubs? Is there more regulation that would be helpful, more enforcement, or what is, or have they done everything as possible?
I think it's very, very difficult because groupthink is one of the most powerful conditions in human behavior. And it's far, the more highly educated you are, the more prone you are to this virus of groupthink. So I would say it'll be almost impossible, Mr. Politician, Mr. Witty and doctors, etc., to believe this. But what you've got very, very, very rare opportunity now. You've got an experiment in a country of 10 million people who've done it a different way, called Sweden, and they've concentrated the population. And any rugby coach or squash coach will, etc., will tell you, don't give people too many things to concentrate on. They said there are two things which work. That is social distancing. If you don't get too close to someone, you won't get it. And hand washing. And the third thing is trust the people. That's what the Swedish epidemiologists have said. And they're having great success. It's almost, it's been weaponized and politicized, but it's almost impossible for people to believe that. But that, at the heart of the matter, is the Holy Grail. Those three things.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks very much for your time, Tim. It's always great to speak to you. Thanks very much for everybody who's watching these videos. If you want to make a donation to the IEA, please do. It's iea.org.uk/donate. I will see you again in the near future. Take care. Thank you.